must have been pretty
Yes.
demanding. Let's go back a little bit to start things. And of course, thank you very much. I think I'm going to learn a lot of lessons from you, and I'm sure a lot of people will. And you were saying that there's lessons everywhere. And I guess one of the most important things anyone can take from any experience in life is, what are the learnings? When did you start realizing that?
I think on different levels, you learn that pretty quickly from the time you're a child, right? You make a bad choice, there's a consequence, there's a learning process. As a businesswoman, I think I really started to embrace that in probably within the last 10 or 15 years, when I really started leading teams, building companies, being responsible for people other than myself. That becomes exceedingly important, because there are more hard days than there are easy days. And if you can't find the lessons hidden in there somewhere, then you're stuck in a hard day cycle. And that's certainly not sustainable. So you really have to kind of look at the shortcomings, the failures, and do some inflection and evaluation. So I would say in the last 10 years or so, that's become a part of my daily process.
I might want to take you back to that, but in terms of getting to where you are now, I mean, I look back at you did a 3-year chemistry-based degree, and your first, after sort of academia experiences, if I look at them, you worked at the front line in terms of, putting those skills to the test in the lab, and then you went into the sales side of things and, dealing with customers. Was that always going to be your trajectory? I mean, how did you end up choosing to study chemistry, and which inevitably led you on the path ultimately to work in, the biochemical field?
Yeah, no, I never thought I would end up as a medicinal chemist out of school. So I went into undergrad thinking I was going to go to med school. I always wanted to be a pediatric oncologist. And while I was there, I realized that I was very good at the science, and I liked the underlying science better than I was liking the bureaucracy of all my internships, shadowing physicians, working at hospitals, trying to understand the ins and outs of really what a day-to-day is. And I pretty quickly realized that the science was what motivated me. And so as I was graduating undergrad, I did have a position at a medical school, had some family issues come up, and thought, okay, well, I can defer that for a year. I'll go be a chemist for Novartis Pharmaceuticals, who had found and hired me based on my undergrad thesis. And, the hands of time kind of ticked by, and that 1 year turned into more of a career with Novartis. And when I decided that I loved the science, but the lab dynamic wasn't exactly what I was looking for, I moved over to the commercial side, and it's just been the sweetest, most perfect fit of science, patient interaction, changing paradigms, the ups, the downs of startup. It all is just a perfect combination for me.
How did you make that perfect combination work? Because, some people would look at the way you jumped around and say, well, this person potentially is somebody who doesn't settle. But yet, if you sort of thread the projects you've been involved in, you've clearly picked up, valuable experience in terms of learning what the real issues are for the people who work within this field at various levels. And then you've used that experience, I guess, to, as a learning process, which has then made you a more valuable person the higher up an organization you have climbed. I mean, do you get a sense that you are completely in touch with every level based on the sort of trajectory you've taken?
That's a great question. So I want to be pretty clear in that, if I had stayed in one position for the last 18 years, I wouldn't be nearly as well-rounded as I am. I wouldn't have the view of my world, my industry, my peers, where I want to go. None of that would be developed. And so I've been very deliberate in the positions I've taken, the choices I've made, the fields I've specialized in. And if you go back and look, the most important thing I've done was spend a significant amount of time at the front line in sales and marketing. That is, I believe, key to becoming a good leader. Because the second you forget what your core team, your front lines, whether it be development or sales, once you forget what they're doing, once you forget what motivates them and how hard that job is, I argue you can't be a successful leader. And so, I was very deliberate. I always knew I wanted to build and lead companies, but I was very deliberate in how I got there. I spent time in different sectors of the biotech and life sciences industry. So I really understood how all pieces came together. I launched new products. I worked for small companies, big companies. I grew markets within big companies. I wanted to make sure I had a feel for what the entire industry had to offer. And it became really clear to me over the years that introducing something novel, something disruptive, something that made a meaningful change in how patients received care was what motivated me. And that's really led me through all of the recent companies and decisions and to where I am today. And so in my mind, the deliberate decisions I made to move and or jump and or transition, they were exactly what I needed to have the mindset I have today.
And where you are now, I mean, you talk about wanting to make a difference, and one of the big challenges in the world, anyone who lives in the non-developed world will know this, and even in the developed world, getting mammograms is not something which is a basic, something which is straightforward. It can be expensive. It can be difficult to get, even if you do have the money, because you may not be close enough. There may be an overloaded system. So in terms of, working for Mammogen now, is this one of the most exciting projects you've been involved with?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, leading Mammogen and IV Bio Holdings, the ecosystem of which Mammogen is a part of, with its founder, has been a tremendous experience thus far. And what makes it extremely exciting is not just that we're unlocking true early detection. I mean, we are detecting stage 1 disease from biofluids, which in and of itself is absolutely amazing. But it's the larger vision. It's how do we actually take this best-in-class performance and do exactly what you said, make it available, scalable, geographically diverse, so that every patient who needs one of our tests and development has the opportunity and the funding to get it. And so there's a lot that goes into that goal. And it's not just all encompassed within Mammogen and IV Bio Holdings. Much of it will be partnered with other endeavors other companies that I'm building, because truthfully, this is not a one ecosystem job. If we really want to make sure patients can access and pay for and get to the care they need, this is going to take a village. And so what we are doing at Mammogen and IV Bio Holdings and another company I'm building will be coming out of stealth mode relatively soon. It's all about bringing those pieces together and shifting the power to the patient and the physician so that we receive the care we need at the time we need it and in all corners of the universe. And that's it.
Given what you said, I guess the whole trajectory of the last 18 years, making those contacts and meeting different people and experiencing what the realities are, that really does put you in almost the perfect position to take this on, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Spending time in diagnostics and life sciences and data acquisition and patient care and frontline selling and corporate strategy, all of that comes together to ultimately pull off something that's never been pulled off before. And not necessarily because other people can't do it. I think more so because other people don't want to be disruptive enough to do it. But that's not a problem for me.
Yeah, disruptive is, it is a 21st century phrase, I guess. We'll use that. But the fact of the matter is the people who are making the biggest strides in the world are definitely the disruptors. And what better field to be disruptive in than making, medical care accessible to as many people as possible. In terms of the future, prospects and perspectives, you're in the process of developing this and making it effective and rolling it out there. So what's this kind of trajectory in terms of reaching as far as you'd like to reach with Mammogen?
So right now we are in clinical development. That means our R&D part is done. We know we have a list of proprietary biomarkers that detect early stage breast cancer from blood and saliva. That piece is done. Now we're taking that science and turning it into a test. And it will be a PCR test, which most of the world is very familiar with now after having lived through
Yes.
COVID for the last 2+ years. I suppose if there's a silver lining to a global pandemic, the fact that everybody now knows what messenger RNA and PCR is a huge advantage for us at Mammogen and IV Bioholdings, because all of our technology across our companies is RNA based and PCR focused. And that is very intentional. Much of the world is focusing on next generation sequencing, which is a wonderful technology, but it's very expensive and it's very difficult to deploy in a scalable fashion. Again, I want to go back to the fact that our goal is to make sure all patients who need our clinical diagnostics, so if we're talking about Mammogen specifically, all women can access an early detection breast cancer test. That's exceedingly difficult if we focus on next generation sequencing. So we very intentionally are creating a PCR test based on RNA markers, as opposed to what most people are doing, which is DNA markers. And that is because we have found that RNA truly unlocks the body's response to a disease state, which allows us to detect it much earlier. Those focusing on DNA have done wonderful things in late stage disease detection or recurrence monitoring or predicting recurrence. And that's a very important part of the disease spectrum, but it doesn't necessarily allow us to make meaningful strides in early detection and or improving outcomes. And that's what we're here to do. So we have very intentionally focused on RNA. We are creating our PCR test. And that will go into a larger clinical trial setting. I do want to be very specific, though. We're doing things very different than the way the rest of the industry has done them, and that is by design. And so even before we get into I'll call it the more traditional clinical trial setting, our technology has been tested on upwards of 1,800 patients, real clinical samples. And that's quite impressive for the stage we're at as a company. And it all is about rearranging the pieces of a traditional diagnostic development and commercial runway or pathway and doing it more efficiently, more creatively, with more of an eye towards partnership than trying to take on all of the cost, time, and bandwidth and resources necessary to do it as on our own. And it sounds simple, right? But it's actually quite different than the way companies traditionally do this. And truthfully, up to this point, it's allowed us to save north of 95% of time and cost as compared to what the industry would have spent to get here.
Well, I mean, in those terms, I guess you're creating a new space. It's called disruption, and you mentioned that already. And of course, what that does mean ultimately is that the end product ends up being cheaper to roll out, and that is
right.
Essentially one of the goals, right?
That is right. We do not intend to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to take 8 to 12 years to have a 50% chance of failure and then pass that cost on to the patients in the instance we succeed. That is just it's not efficient, never has been, and there are better ways to do it. And so we intend to launch with a reasonably priced, affordable, scalable, deployable test. Otherwise, we're limiting the impact we can have on the world from day one.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. That would certainly be, I'm almost sure, one of your greatest accomplishments. You've been recognized with various awards. You've certainly carved a very successful career, which is a great achievement in itself. But you, on a personal level, what is the one thing which sticks out for you, at this stage in your career as being your greatest accomplishment, your proudest moment, perhaps?
My proudest moment. My greatest accomplishment is really my family, my husband and my 2 kids. There's nothing that supersedes that. But I will say professionally, I think my greatest accomplishment is creating ecosystems of people that have chosen their mission because they believe in me as a leader. They believe in the way I like to build and create businesses. And that is the ultimate, I think, barometer of success. Awards are wonderful. Recognition is wonderful. But when you have a team of people that believe in you and what you're trying to accomplish enough to grow with you, develop with you, move to companies with you, that to me is where the rubber meets the road. That's really telling me that something I'm doing is helping other people grow and develop. And I don't think there is a greater accomplishment than that.
That is, I think, yeah. I mean, that resonates with me. Being able to nurture, nourish, and help other people, become the best people they can. That inevitably is hugely satisfying. And if one thinks of a family, that's one of the richest experiences in the family. It's helping each other become just better people and happier people. But in those terms, transferring that kind of thinking into the corporate environment where there are inevitably huge pressures and challenges. I know when we were trying to set up this interview, for instance, it took a couple of tries because you're a busy woman and things crop up. So how do you get that balance right in terms of dealing with those challenges and still being able to put on that same face you want to put on every day? Because some people already battle with that. And when they are stressed, for instance, they become a different person.
Yeah. Listen, I can't say I've mastered that. That is a constant working process. But here's what I can tell you. Triaging is 100% necessary. And having a team that you trust, that you can be 100% transparent with, and that will act in your best interest when you need to triage or delegate is step number one. Finding the balance between being an employee, an employer, and or a wife, a mom, a friend, a brother, a sister, that can be difficult. Leaving a hard day at work behind when you're headed to, your kid's soccer game or hockey game and you need to put on a happy mom face, that's also difficult. But for me, what I found has worked is actual physical engagement. And what I mean is keeping my body moving all day, every day. So anybody who has ever Zoomed with me or follows me on various social media outlets, you'll see I walk on my standing desk treadmill. I'm standing now. I'm not walking. I gave you the courtesy of standing still, but normally I'm walking all day, every day. And I have found that just physical motion keeps me more centered, more grounded, patient. It allows me to better triage and organize my days, my thoughts, my time. And it sounds very simple, but I can tell you when I stand still all day, I'm not nearly as productive, patient, and kind with anybody in my life as when I am keeping myself physically moving. I'm just a happier person then.
That's really interesting because I think a lot of people have battled with a lack of motion as a result of the pandemic and this thing
Absolutely.
of being inactive, when they're at home and, having to develop and actually not being aware of it. You're clearly aware of those. A lot of what you're telling me in that responding to the last question is about how those aren't necessarily principles which leaders need. Anyone can draw value from that in terms of productivity. But in terms of leadership principles, and you've spoken about triaging and knowing what to do at given moment. But when it comes to actually leading the team, supervising, managing the people, do you have any particular principles which you've maybe learned from somebody else, read, you're applying, which you think sort of define who you are as a leader of people?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, transparency is absolutely necessary. Your team has a right to know when things are going well, when things are not going well, when there are risks involved, when there are huge successes that will benefit everybody. Transparency is key. And I have found that being transparent with my immediate team, my extended teams, it it instills a confidence and a commitment and a unified collective vision. People want to work harder for themselves and their team when they feel like they know exactly what they're working for and what's important at that stage in growth and what it takes to get to the next value inflection point. I don't think that's something that should be reserved for the officers of a company. I think that there needs to be more transparency. And in my experience, when I have done that, success follows. And so that's something that I will continue to do. And, you know, secondary to that, it's pretty simple. It's trusting your gut as a leader, because especially as a relatively young woman leader, trust your gut, because there are always going to be people who tell you it's wrong. But if you know you can execute on something and you know your idea is better than the one being tossed around in the room, it doesn't matter that you're young or that you're a woman and you're the only young woman in the room. Speak up. The sooner you start speaking up, the sooner people actually start to listen. And that's something I took too long to learn. And it sounds really simple, but it's not. It's really, really hard. But I can promise, the sooner you do that, the sooner you can weed out the people who don't add value to your life or your career, and the sooner you can actually start to make a difference. You know, and that's really paired with knowing your boundaries. There are inevitably going to be multiple, when you're asked to do things that you are uncomfortable with or that you don't believe to be in the best interest of your company, your patients, your shareholders, and you really need to know where your boundaries are, because getting sucked into that gray zone can be very uncomfortable and very dangerous. And so that's really kind of linked with finding your voice. Saying no early on is exceedingly important to being a good leader, to being perceived as a leader, to making the best choices for all the people you're beholden to. So I guess those would be my leadership tips.
Fantastic. Now, you've spoken about that learning process with some regret, that it took you so long. You know, inevitably one learns as one gets more experience. I don't want to use the word gets older, but you you spend more time in a job.
Yeah.
A lot of that is learning from failures.
Yes.
You know, you failed to recognize an issue, maybe, then you recognized it. Now you've taken it on board. One of the biggest failures, presumably, is that one, based on the way you speak about it. But, you know, what other moments have you looked back and said, well, you know, I could have done that better? And what did you take from them?
I think some of the failures that I've really have stuck with me, that I've changed my behavior because of, are really in the way I've interacted with people around me, whether it be people who were superiors, bosses, and or people who work for me, or for my managers. And that's really important, because I think probably the majority of my learnings came from difficult discussions with either groups of those people. And I found early on, I just wanted to get my point out. I wanted them to understand where I was coming from. And that inevitably didn't lead to any type of mutually beneficial result. It was more argument inducing than it was problem solving. And so I think one of the most important things I've learned from failure is it's so exceedingly important to listen first. Even if what you know you're listening to isn't what you want to hear, or it may be wrong altogether, but your opinion can only be distilled down to an actionable change if the other person can appreciate and believe that you're listening to them. And so that was a hard one for me, and I messed that up a lot. But I'd like to think that I'm getting better at that. I do my absolute best to listen first and listen often, and sometimes listen and then not say anything back and actually take an uncomfortable amount of time to think about my response. So it's very intentional, and it's solving a problem rather than creating a problem. And that goes both ways, up the chain and down the chain. And so, yeah, that's something that I hope I'm getting better at, but again, still definitely a work in progress.
You got to be conscious. Yeah, no, I wish I'd sort of taken that on board sooner as well. That's for sure. So success. You've had your fair share. Rolling out Mammogen would be a great success to you. You've spoken about your family, being one of the most rewarding things. But if you could sort of describe what success looks like, what does it look like in Elizabeth's life?
I personally will feel like I reached my goal when I create an ecosystem. So this is not one company, one mission, one team, an ecosystem where the pieces of healthcare have been rearranged to the point that allows for this. Early detection, populous precision health is achieved in a way where people can get the information they need to induce their best outcomes, and they have the ability to fund it themselves so they're not entirely beholden to insurance companies. When that ecosystem becomes a reality, I will have reached my goal. That will be my version of success. Now, I can tell you all of those pieces are being built now. Those ecosystems will be coming together in a meaningful way. And this is the perfect moment in time to do that. There are a lot of positive tailwinds that come out of the last 2 years, a shift in mindset, a shift in what we accept as okay, what we don't, a focus on being able to diagnose a disease before you can treat it, a focus on actually taking care of people on a more personalized basis. All of these things are really good things. Understanding that people need to be able to fund healthcare outside of what your insurance company says your doctor is okay to do with you, that's not okay. And people are starting to understand that. And I'll tell you, there are pieces of healthcare that have become tremendous assets that we are not utilizing in the most effective way. And so I intend to change that. And all of this comes together to allow people to be active participants in their own healthcare journey so that we all reach a point of populous precision health.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the nirvana we all aim for, and fingers up pointed at the U.S. health system, but it is a system. Other countries don't have access to the same level of expertise. We're a long way from there, but certainly making products more affordable, accessible, and more democratic in terms of the way they're used and they're accessed is definitely the way to go. In terms of new ideas, I mean, you obviously have a lot of experience in this position. Some of the ideas you won't want to speak about because they're probably of great value, but in terms of the new kind of processes you're using, particularly just on this campaign, the Mammogen program, what kind of things are you using here?
Really what's unlocked our early success is the way we are using and approaching existent data. That has given us, it has preserved and induced so much efficiency in our model that it allows us to execute at extremely high levels and rearrange pieces of the equation so that we can get products that don't exist now to the patients who need them the most quickly and inexpensively and safely. And it really comes down to how we're utilizing data and technology. That is the secret to our success. And then, secondary to that are some very deliberate decisions, choosing RNA over DNA as our modality, setting ourselves up so that we can become multimodal at any point. I'll give you an example. All of our intellectual property portfolios at Mammogen, as well as the other two companies within IV Bio Holdings, is not just based on the RNA markers. It also looks forward to the corresponding proteins. But commercially, proteins aren't at the same technological point as RNA is. If and when technology ever catches up to clinical work in that manner, we'll be ready to execute on that. So we're we're very intentional in the decisions we're making now, but we're planning for all future possibilities, from our IP strategy to our data and technology decisions. And all of it is really about getting to a point where IV Bio Holdings, of which obviously Mammogen is a part, is the only ecosystem that is comprehensively bringing in RNA information, radiology information, protein information in a way that allows us to best detect, diagnose, and treat disease. And that's really what it's all about. It's flipping the order of operations, and it's thinking about existing assets in new ways.
You've spoken about how you developed your leadership style and your desired leadership style, which of course you've admitted, as ever, sometimes isn't where you wish it would be. Have you ever taken on board, comments from other people, suggestions and recommendations? What sort of people, what have you heard from others about the way you lead?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I think any leader who doesn't take on suggestions or constructive feedback isn't much of a leader at all. And so, I mean, again, it goes back to listening. I mean, I've taken comments from, I don't like the way we're having this conversation. I think you're yelling at me, all the way to, I don't think you're holding me accountable enough. So there's always a spectrum that you get, but yeah, I mean, it's a work in progress, like everything else. Taking other people's feelings, thoughts, and constructive criticism and turning that into a change in your own behavior is difficult, but it's something I do every day.
Yeah, you've told us about your vision in life and how richly family and your whole relationship, I guess, with the world at large kind of defines your successful journey. So I'm not going to even pick up on that. If there's one characteristic that, and I guess, all leaders have different characteristics. If there's one characteristic a leader needs to have, what would you say that characteristic is?
The ability to build teams around them with people far smarter than we are. If I'm the smartest person in the room, then I'm in the wrong room, and that's pretty dangerous to the world at large. Yeah. You have to be able to recognize that there are people who are way better at things than you are, and bring those people into your ecosystem, listen to them, encourage them, and ultimately bring them on the journey with you. Just because you have the biggest title in the room doesn't mean you should have the biggest brain or biggest vision or even the most important piece of the equation. And I think that's it. I mean, there are plenty of leaders who like to be the smartest person in the room, and it's often those leaders that never actually accomplish a whole heck of a lot.
Yeah, because you need to be an enabler for the intellectual wealth that you're harnessing. You've spoken about some of the inputs you've received in your career, but anything which sticks out, recently that's really struck a chord with you?
In terms of successes?
In terms of advice.
Oh, in terms of advice, honestly, I just said the best advice I ever got was, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah. And
that it was from somebody who is still my mentor. And it's something I think about very often, nearly daily. It's the best advice I could give anybody, is don't be afraid to let other people shine. It's not all about the spotlight being on you. And you'll find if you try to keep the spotlight on you all the time, you're only going to make incremental progress. You need people better than you at certain things, smarter than you in certain ways, with different skill sets and backgrounds and ideas and visions and networks. And that's only until you recognize that and encourage that, that's when you can start to make something greater than incremental change. But it's the core piece of advice I would transmit to anybody I'm very grateful was given to me.
It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. But in terms of, your leadership journey and who you are as a leader, is there anything else that you think it would have been nice to discuss or for me to have asked you?
Gosh, no. I mean, you did a pretty good job at asking me everything. I think the only other piece of, I guess it's a wish that I would put out to the world, is that leaders come in all different sizes, shapes, genders, backgrounds, and we have to start, and we are starting to, but we have to start moving away from this predefined vision of what a leader looks like. I get it all the time, from you don't look like a chemist to you don't look like a CEO. There is nothing. There is no look to anything. Find the people that are good at what they do and encourage and promote them. It's my only real, I think, big wish for the world when it comes to creating more meaningful companies that actually create impactful change. We've got to start looking at leaders in a different light.
Elizabeth, it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. You are inspiring. It's great,
Thank you. I appreciate that.